While the world's eyes are focused on distractions, three powers are moving dangerously close to a no-return confrontation: the United States, Iran, and Russia. What was once just political tension has now turned into a possible global war. And the scariest thing, the Bible already warned us that this would happen. In this video, you will understand why Donald Trump's re-election could trigger an attack on Iran, how Russia is positioning itself on the side of the US enemy, and why this explosive alliance could be the trigger for a global collapse. We will expose the behind the scenes of this silent war, the ignored signs, and what could happen in the coming hours if the world continues to pretend that everything is fine. But before continuing, I need to ask you something very important. Subscribe to the channel now. This simple gesture makes all the difference. This channel exists to open the spiritual eyes of those who are seeking truth in the midst of chaos. And each new sign-up shows YouTube that this content is relevant, urgent, and needs to reach more people. Here you won't just see news, you will understand how each event connects with biblical prophecies and how it directly impacts your spiritual life. If you believe something bigger is about to happen, then this is the place for you. Sign up now. Activate the bell and come with me, because what is about to happen could change the course of humanity. The spark in the fuse. Have you ever felt like a shadow was hanging over the world, as if the air was thicker, the streets were quieter, and people's eyes were emptier? Something invisible seems to be spreading, and no, it's not just another bad cycle for humanity. There is a silent, growing sadness that has taken over cities, families, churches, and the question that few have the courage to ask echoes like thunder. Is this just emotional or spiritual? In recent decades, the number of people diagnosed with depression has skyrocketed. The statistics scream. Medications became routine. But while the world searches for explanations in brain chemistry, there is another book, ancient, sacred, often ignored, that prophesied this long before any modern psychiatrist. Men will faint with terror in anticipation of the things that are coming upon the world. Lucas 21:26. This is not just a global emotional crisis. This could be one of the biggest signs that we are living in the final days. Imagine the scenario: an entire generation surrounded by technology, distractions, stimuli, and yet empty, as if everyone was numb to something bigger that oppresses them. Have you noticed? It's in the lost looks on public transport, in the silent posts of disguised help, in the constant search for something that fills an invisible hole inside the soul. But what if this hole wasn't natural? What if it had been opened by something you can't see but feel every day? The ancient prophets spoke of a time when faith would grow cold, love would die, and spiritual darkness would become normal. In the last days, difficult times will come. 2 Timothy 3:1. Look around. The times have come. People have lost their reference, their connection with the divine, and are trying to fill this void with addictions, status, success, pleasure, without realizing that they are surrendering themselves, little by little, to a system that wants exactly that: fragile, tired, and controllable humans. What started as discouragement turned into sadness. Then, anguish. Today, it is an emotional epidemic. But what will come tomorrow? The Bible doesn't just talk about visible signs, wars, earthquakes, pestilences. It also reveals the invisible collapse, that of emotions, hope, and spirituality. The love of many will grow cold, Matthew 24:12. And what is depression if not the absence of love? Love for yourself, love for others, love for God. But why doesn't anyone talk about this in the news? Why does the world ignore this spiritual aspect? Because to recognize this would be to admit that there is a war going on, and that it is not against flesh or blood. Do you feel this weight, this restlessness that has no name? It may not just be your pain, It may be a reflection of a much larger battle which is happening right before our eyes, but at a frequency that only the soul feels. And the scariest thing, this sadness is not random. She has a purpose. The origin of the conflict, open wounds, since 2018. But to understand what we are experiencing, now we need to look back, because no fire starts suddenly. There's always a spark, a trigger. And in this case, it was lit in 2018, but its embers were burning long before that. The tension between the United States and Iran did not arise out of nowhere. It was built in silence, fueled by broken promises, ignored pacts, and a distrust that never healed. Let's go back to 2015. A historic agreement, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, is reached between the great powers and Iran. B. Objective: prevent Tehran from developing nuclear weapons. In exchange, economic sanctions would be lifted, freeing billions of dollars frozen for years. There was a glimmer of hope that for the first time in decades, the Middle East would breathe peace. But hope without trust is a ticking time bomb. 3 years later, in 2018, then President Donald Trump made a decision that changed everything. He breaks the agreement. It accuses Iran of continuing its nuclear program in the shadows. It claims on a global network that the money released by the pact had been used to finance terrorist groups such as Hezbollah and Shiite militias in Iraq. The world watches, astonished. It wasn't just a diplomatic rupture. It was the reopening of a barely healed wound, and Iran responds as expected. He resumes his nuclear program, increases uranium enrichment levels, abandons imposed limits. A silent climb begins, a dangerous dance between provocation and response. But this time, there is one. More ingredient. The feeling that the clock is ticking and that at any time it can reset. Many thought it was just about politics, of sanctions, of geopolitical games. But when you look closer, you notice something deeper, something spiritual, as if this conflict was more than territory and power, as if it were part of an ancient cycle, a tragic repetition of wrong choices, wounded pride and distorted truths. Why do we insist on believing that we can control chaos with fragile agreements? Why do we trust that treaties written on paper would be enough to contain fear, resentment, the desire for revenge? And the scariest thing, why do we ignore the signs? When Trump breaks the pact, he doesn't just destroy an agreement, he sets in motion a chain of events that spreads like a crack in glass under pressure. And the world, distracted by other crises, doesn't notice. The pain of 2018 still pulses, still burns, and today she bleeds. This is not a new conflict. It is the continuation of a Cold War that has never cooled down, a battle for control, for dominance, but also for souls. Because when leaders choose confrontation over reconciliation, the innocent are the ones who pay the price, the families, young people who grow up with hate in their hearts and fear in their eyes. Now imagine what happens when, in the midst of this long-standing tension, a superpower like Russia decides to get involved. The next turning point is closer than we imagine. Trump's return and the new bombing threat. The world was still trying to digest the effects of 2018 when, like a bolt of lightning that cuts across a storm-laden sky, the news spreads. Donald Trump is back as President of the United States, and with it, a foreign policy returns that leaves no room for ambiguity. If there was any hope of détente, it evaporated in a matter of days. The tone changes, the words harden, and what seemed like just a flame about to go out receives gasoline. It doesn't take long until, in an interview broadcast live on NBC, Trump releases the phrase that freezes the blood of analysts and leaders around the planet. They will see bombings like never before. A promise, a threat, or both? The world's control room goes on alert. Iran reacts with fury. Its leaders promise a response that will blow up the entire region. The embassies are silent. Fear returns to the streets. But the most dangerous thing is not the weapons. It's the words. Because a war, before being fought with missiles and tanks, begins in the language. And this war has already begun. Every sentence spoken by a world leader has the power to alter the course of history. And now they are being launched like projectiles, targeting hearts, manipulating masses, distorting the truth until it loses its meaning. Satellites show military movements at the borders, markets fluctuate, airports increase the level of security. But what no one seems to understand is that the real danger is not in the weapons we see, but in the silence that precedes the sound of the explosion. It's in the empty gaze of civilians who live under the daily tension of a conflict that could erupt at any second. How many would die if a single missile crossed the sky right now? How many families would be destroyed by a decision made in an air-conditioned office with coffee on the table? How many young people would be sent to fight in a war that didn't start for them? There is something dark about this climb, something that goes beyond diplomacy. It's as if we were faced with a prophetic script already written, and page by page, the world's leaders were just fulfilling the roles that history had reserved for them. But who wrote this script? Maybe you're thinking, that's just political rhetoric. But what if it isn't? What if we are truly at a point of no return? What if these declarations are not just electoral strategies, but the drums of a judgment about to be executed? Imagine a missile launched, a defense system that fails, an immediate retaliation, and then chaos. The chain reaction that everyone fears, but few believe will actually happen. Until it happens, the world is playing with gunpowder, and the hands that hold her tremble with arrogance. The next question is no more, will it happen? But yes, when? Russia enters the game. The explosive alliance with Iran. As the world counted down the minutes since Trump's statement, something even more unsettling was moving behind the scenes. Silent, calculated, almost invisible. A geopolitical chess game that had been played for years, but now the entire board was in check. Russia breaks the silence. Moscow, until then a strategic observer, crosses the line that separates diplomacy from action and declares full support for Iran, not with empty speeches, but with something that screams louder than words: weapons, drones, military technology, and billion-dollar energy deals. It is the birth of an explosive alliance sealed not only by interests, but by common resentments against the United States, against NATO, against the Western world. But this union was not born yesterday. It has been stitched together, thread by thread, since the world turned its back on Moscow during the war in Ukraine. When sanctions crushed the Russian economy and the Kremlin found itself under siege, Iran was one of the few to reach out. In return, he offered drones for the skies over Ukraine, political support, and most importantly, loyalty. Now, it's Russia's turn to reciprocate, and the message is clear. Any attack on Iran will not be faced alone. This simple statement changes everything, because until then, the tension was between the United States and Iran. But now, the board has a new king, one who has already demonstrated to the world what he is capable of, one that, with a single move, can turn a regional conflict into a global war. And the West knows this. Satellites capture movements of Russian equipment around the Caspian Sea. Leaked documents reveal that thousands of weapons are being sent via underground routes into Iranian territory. There are rumors, unconfirmed, of tactical warheads being prepared for use in case of direct aggression. Nobody wants to say that out loud, but everyone thinks the same thing. Are we heading towards World War III? Oil agreements between Moscow and Tehran only strengthen mutual dependence. While the West faces energy crises, both countries protect themselves with their own supply network. They are more prepared than they have ever been, and most dangerously, they are willing to do anything. But the big question remains: would the United States be ready to face two powers simultaneously? One in the Middle East, another in Eastern Europe, one with radical ideology, the other with nuclear weapons and a history of brutal clashes. Washington's silence begins to look like fear. Emergency meetings become routine, and while leaders debate strategies, time slips like sand through their fingers. Because when two powers unite against a common enemy, the next step is rarely diplomacy, it's confrontation. And we, the spectators of this deadly game, need to ask, is this all just about politics? Or is there something deeper unfolding before our eyes? Something prophetic, perhaps? Something that has already been announced and is just being fulfilled? Rivals in the past, allies by convenience. But what few know is that not long ago, Russia and Iran were on opposite sides. This alliance that scares the world today, this partnership of weapons, oil, and military promises, was not born of trust. It was born of necessity. And the most dangerous thing about an alliance of convenience is that it doesn't need enemies to collapse, just a bad moment, a misinterpreted gesture, a miscalculation. In 2010, the scenario was completely different. Russia, pressured by the West, voted against Iran in the UN Security Council, supporting economic sanctions and, more than that, suspending the sale of advanced defense systems, such as the feared S-300, a direct blow to Iranian sovereignty. Tehran felt betrayed. Moscow, at that time, was still trying to balance its image in the Western world. I tried to appear diplomatic, but everything changed. With the invasion of Ukraine and Russia's growing isolation, Vladimir Putin saw his list of allies dwindle. China maintained a strategic distance. Europe turned its face. There were few left, among them Iran, an uncomfortable but useful partner, a country that had also been rejected, also punished, also hurt by the same opponent, the United States. And that's when the game changed. What was distrust became pragmatism. What was tension became agreements. But make no mistake, there is no love in this pact, just strategy, because behind the handshakes, there are still attentive, calculating eyes, measuring how far the other can go without betraying. It is a marriage of interest, with a divorce always lurking. The real question is not whether they will attack together, but if, in the event of a crisis, one would protect the other until the end. History shows that alliances like this are fragile. They are born from pain, not from affinity. They grow in chaos, not in trust. And when they are tested, they break. Russia knows that Iran is volatile. Iran knows that Russia acts out of convenience. A double game where any imbalance can generate irreversible consequences. And that is what makes the current moment so dangerous. Because while the world believes this union is solid, the cracks are widening behind the scenes. There are secret reports indicating divergences in military strategies. There is mutual suspicion about espionage. There are suspicions, never confirmed, that each one was monitoring the other, not as an ally, but as a possible threat. So, what will happen if the US decides to attack? Will Russia retaliate? Or will you step back and watch from afar? What if Iran is pressured to act in ways that compromise Moscow? What would Putin do? These questions still have no answers. But the world needs to understand an essential truth. Alliances forged in fear are like sand castles in the face of the tide of war. And that tide has already started to rise. The final warning: the consequences will be catastrophic. It was with a firm voice and the look of someone who has seen too much that Sergei Ryabkov, Russian Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, addressed the entire world. It was no longer a veiled threat. It was no longer diplomatic rhetoric. It was a clear, direct warning, sharp as newly forged steel. Any attack on Iranian nuclear facilities will have catastrophic consequences. And not just for the Middle East. For a second, the planet stopped. The sentence was not said in a closed office. It was released in front of the cameras, to be heard by everyone, including those who insist on pretending that nothing is about to happen. But what exactly would these catastrophic consequences be? To understand what is at stake, it is necessary to remove the veil from political discourse and face the reality of a nuclear war, even a tactical one. A missile doesn't miss by chance. A nuclear target does not burn silently. The impact goes far beyond the heat of the explosion. It crosses invisible borders, contaminates rivers, destroys ecosystems, turns cities into dead zones, and drags millions of people to a destination of no return. Imagine radiation spreading with the wind, crossing mountains and deserts. Imagine crowded hospitals, children crying, countries closing borders. Imagine the collapse of markets, fear invading the streets, and a new wave of refugees, not for political persecution, but for biological survival. And then, what starts as retaliation turns into a chain reaction. Israel, on high alert, decides to act. Turkey, under internal pressure, responds. China observes and calculates, maintain neutrality, or protect its strategic investments. NATO meets in a hurry, and the United States, trapped by its own decisions, finds itself forced to choose between pride and prudence. This is no longer a regional conflict. It's a global avalanche about to roll down the mountain, and no one knows how to stop it. Sergei Ryabkov lets out, almost like a sigh, that there is still time. There is still a small window for negotiation. But that window is closing quickly, and the sound of the glass breaking is drowned out by the sirens of haste, arrogance, political blindness. The train is already moving, and right now every second counts. But what about us? What can we do, faced with forces so greater, so far away? We can choose not to be blind. We can share what's happening. We can press for dialogue, for truth, for conscience. Because when the world collapses, those who knew and remained silent also have blood on their hands. The future is being decided in the shadows of offices and speeches, but it is also being shaped in the hands of those who do not ignore the signs, and they are everywhere. The final question is not, will it happen? And will we be ready for the consequences when it happens? Are we on the brink of war? And now all that remains is the question that echoes like silent thunder in the most conscious heads. Are we on the brink of war? Not a distant war, confined to maps that only generals study. Not a conflict on the other side of the world that only appears as a cold headline at the end of the newspaper. We are talking about a confrontation that, if it breaks out, will change the way we live, how we think, how we feel, and how we pray. The signs are all there. The spark has been burning since 2018. The inflammatory rhetoric of world leaders, the unstable alliance between Russia and Iran, the nuclear threat lurking behind the scenes like a patient predator, and now the final warning given loud and clear. If someone pulls that trigger, there will be no stopping the bullet. But there is something that still pulses, even in the midst of this imminent chaos, the possibility of choice. And as tenuous as that choice seems now, it exists. Diplomacy has not yet been buried. The dialogue channels are still breathing. The world can still retreat. You can still think. You can still stop. But will it? This is perhaps the most distressing question of all, because decisions are being made now, right now, as you watch this video. And they are not just being decided by generals, politicians, or presidents. They are also being shaped by public opinion, due to international pressure, for the collective consciousness that calls out, even if in silence, for a path that does not involve destruction. History has already taught us, with blood, that every war begins with a choice. and that the first step towards ruin never seems so serious until it is too late. What if it's too late? What if tomorrow we wake up to a notification on our cell phone that says, "Explosion hits nuclear facilities in Iran. Russia responds with airstrike"? What would come next? Where would you be? How would you explain this to your children? What kind of world will we inherit if we don't know how to protect peace while it can still be saved? We are not talking about fiction. It's not a conspiracy theory. It is an ongoing reality, a succession of decisions that are stacked like dominoes about to fall. And it all starts, or ends, with a single movement. Therefore, this video is more than a warning. It's a request. May you not just watch, but think, question, share, comment, because the more voices that are raised, the harder it will be for those in power to pretend that no one is watching. Yes, we are on the brink of war, but we are also on the cusp of something even more powerful, the chance to prevent the worst. The future can still be written, but the pen is shaking in the hands of humanity. And maybe, this will be the last blank page we will have. Don't leave without making a decision. Subscribe to the channel now. Here you will receive content that not only informs, but awakens. Videos that reveal what the news doesn't show and that connect current events to biblical prophecies with clarity, courage, and faith. Activate the bell so you don't miss any prophetic alerts, because the next news could change everything, and you need to be prepared. Comment, "I believe," if you feel like the world is different, if something inside you cries out for answers. And share this video with someone who is still spiritually asleep. It might be his last chance to wake up, because the prophetic clock is ticking, and every second now has eternal value.